Welcome. I declare this special meeting of the Port Phillip City Council open, and I welcome the members of the public who are here tonight. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit Willam clan of the Boomerang. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present, and we acknowledge and uphold their traditional relationship to this land. I'll remind the gallery that Council's meeting local law requires that members of the gallery must not interject or take part in councillor debate. Any person who's called to order may be requested to leave the chamber. Notwithstanding this, the Mayor may invite members of the gallery to speak up to 3 minutes on a report listed in the agenda. If you wish to ask a question or speak to a report, please complete the blue form that's available at the table just outside the chamber and hand it to a staff member. If you've registered to speak online, you must let a staff member know that you've arrived, and I encourage you to limit your questions and comments to 3 minutes and to avoid repeating any points that have already been made by other speakers. Please note that all council meetings are live streamed to allow the community to watch and to listen in real time. In accordance with council's local law, this meeting cannot be separately filmed or audio taped unless permissions granted by the Mayor. In the unlikely event of an emergency evacuation, please follow the instructions of the emergency warden. Okay, councillors, we'll move to the agenda now. Item 1 is apologies. Councillors, do we have any apologies? Councillor Crawford?
Councillor Simic is an apology for tonight.
Thank you. We'll note that Councillor Simic is an apology. Item 2, which is declarations of conflicts of interest. Does anyone have a conflict of interest in a matter being discussed at tonight's meeting? I note there are none. Okay, and just before we go to item 3, which is the presentations of reports, I have an acknowledgement of service for Fiona Blair, which is the General Manager, Infrastructure and Amenity. And councillors, pursuant to Council's meeting procedure local law, an item has been added to tonight's meeting to acknowledge the service of Fiona Blair, General Manager, Infrastructure and Amenity, who has resigned to take up the role of an Executive Director, Transport Planning in the newly formed Victorian State Government Department of Transport. Unfortunately, Fiona is unwell tonight and unable to attend tonight's meeting, but I'd like to say a few words in acknowledgement of Fiona's service to the City of Port Phillip, and hopefully either she's watching or maybe she could watch it a bit later on the live stream. So I've just written a few notes here, and I just wanted to firstly acknowledge the most incredible service of being 16 years as an employee of City of Port Phillip. She started life as a youth recreation coordinator, moved to a manager of parks and open space, later manager of property service, a GM of environment and planning, and the last 6 years is when I specifically knew her as leading the infrastructure and amenity division as a GM. I got to meet Fiona, and I certainly know Councillor Bond also met Fiona at this point when she took over from John. Fiona has had some of the toughest and most difficult projects that there is. She's managed to turn them into shining achievements. For example, from the uncoupling of our joint ventures to our recycling crisis response, to delivering the South Melbourne Lifesaving Club, to dealing with the summer management issues that we've had over the years, to helping with implementing the CCTV, the alcohol bans, and responding to hotspots around our city. She's managed our depot right through to her significant work that she was on the committee for the South Melbourne market. Most of the areas under Fiona's direction consistently receives high community ratings. One of the comments I also hear very often from staff in the organisation about Fiona is her strong, fierce, consistent and generous leadership. It's often given without any prompting. And I think that's high accolades because people just don't come out with things like that to councillors. And my personal experience is she's always made sure we've had timely advice in a difficult context while dealing with the pointy end of our community at times. Friday is her last day, and I'd like to say on behalf of all of the councillors here, we want to wish her well as an Executive Director at Transport Planning in the newly formed Victorian State Government of Department of Transport. So we wish you well, Fiona. Sorry you're not here tonight. Councillors, is there anybody else wanted to say a few words? Hopefully I've... Councillor Gross.
Well, I feel obliged to say a few words because I was around when Fiona arrived here. She was a rec officer, and unfortunately, due to the vicissitudes of the electoral cycle, there were 8 years when I wasn't here, and in that time, shame. And there was an extraordinary flowering of an officer in this place, and it was great to see a familiar face when I came back. It was, just really impressive to see this organisation nurture and promote someone from within. I'm sort of a bit of a fan of that. Sorry, Pete. I do like the internal promotion, and to see that whole process. And she is an award-winning executive. Our 3 women... LG Pro won the Leadership Award. Very exciting, and now she's going off to greener pastures. Is this a good thing or a bad thing for us? It's a bad thing because we're losing a seasoned executive who knows this place. It's a good thing because she's clearly ready to go. And secondly, she's going to a place where we've got a big interest, be it your interest in Fisherman's Bend, which depends on transport decisions. You know, we may as well pack up and go home on that issue if we don't get the right answers on the tram and the trains. So we're yet to know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. So, Fiona, whether you're out in the ether or not, a hearty mazel tov, and it's just great for me to see someone come from a vocational appointment at a medium level and then take on the skills of being an executive and a manager. Something I could never do. I'd be a terrible manager, too personally chaotic and other fallibilities. But she's not, and it's great to see. And I'm glad she's going onwards, ever upwards.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Would anyone else like to add? Thank you, Councillor Crawford.
I'll just do a quick one, so Fiona at home. Thank you for your endless patience with us as a councillor group. I know we can be challenging. Thank you for your clear and concise, fearless and very practical advice to us. I love your practicality. Thank you for your commitment and your hard work to the city, for the City of Port Phillip. And I think what's really wonderful about you in general is, I think for women in leadership roles, I think you can't be what you can't see. So you in your position allow many women out there to think of what's possible for them. So thank you very much. And I'll also miss seeing your brooch collection every day, every week. So best of luck. Although you won't really need it, you'll be fantastic. And thank you very much for everything you've done for our city.
Terrific. Okay. All right, get well, Fiona. Now we'll move to item 3, which is presentations of reports. Councillors, we've received 9 requests to speak on our first item, which will be 3.1, the Planning Scheme Amendment, C171 Port, St Kilda Marina. So I'll take them in the order that they're listed here. I'd like to ask Christo van Egmond, please, to come forward. Welcome. Pop the microphone on and state your name and suburb, please.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors. Christo van Egmond and of Toorak. Thank you. Here representing Australian Marina Development Corp in our recent submission around the planning scheme amendment, and would like to say that we are a very passionate group about ensuring the activation of the Marina site is for the community, and our submission reflects that, and that has been heard by Council in a submission we provided. The Council has also reviewed and interpreted our submission requesting changes to the northern position of the Marina foreshore, and we support Council's recommended change on our submission and believe it helps to activate more of the site for the community's benefit, including a cafe, stand-up paddleboarding, kayak storage and hire. Our team has been part of the St Kilda fabric for a long time, and we want to ensure the Marina site becomes a vibrant part of the St Kilda story for the future. Our focus is on minimising the footprint of the business side of the Marina and allow for maximum activation for the public. We support Council's process of an independent planning review, and if our tender is successful, we will ensure we deliver an exceptional addition to the St Kilda experience. AMDC has reviewed all the feedback submitted from the public via the planning scheme amendment, and we believe we address many of the areas of concern raised in various submissions. AMDC's focus is on enhancing the area for all boat users, the general public, local residents and visiting people, and has allocated a substantial amount of funds to ecologically and sustainably develop areas of public realm.
Sorry, just one moment.
Can we just talk to the planning amendment, not any procurement process, please? Thank you.
Together with Council, we believe we can make St Kilda Marina a leading facility, and hope that the planning scheme amendment that we suggested is pushed through. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Van Egmond. Naya Radley, please.
My topic I wish to talk about is the boat shed.
Mr Radley, if you could please state your name again and your suburb.
Apologies, my name is Naya Radley, 20-year resident of Marine Parade, St Kilda. I'd like to just raise a few points about the boat shed capacity and staged approach. I'm a member of the community panel and resident, as I just mentioned, and wanted to share some information to the councillors, some of which would be aware of this and others would not, followed by a question. Firstly, the community panel and council officers were provided some incorrect data in relation to the current capacity and demand of the Marina boat sheds. At the third panel meeting, I raised my concerns and requested that the numbers be verified. This request was rejected by Urbis, who was the consultant providing empirical and market data for the project. I conducted my own research by physically visiting, speaking with and receiving in writing the correct information from the St Kilda Marina operators. I also called every dry boat stack operator in the country, with the results as follows. The information provided to council and the community panel was wrong by a factor of almost 50%. The current demand was closer to 150, 170 versus the 350 that was advised to the panel. The largest capacity urban dry stack nationally is Pier 35, with a capacity of 304, located in Port Melbourne in an industrial zone. Very important. The panel was not advised that a capacity of 400 would make the St Kilda Marina dry stack the biggest urban stack in the country, excluding industrial zoning. I provide all of this information to Cap Hire and council officers, together with my suggestion of undertaking a staged approach. Council officers acted accordingly and correctly after the panel sessions were completed and amended the site brief to reflect up to 300 capacity stack initially, with provision for a further 100 in the future, subject to provision of supporting evidence of demand. This was then put to the community panel for a further online vote and was supported by 80% of the community panel. 2 questions. Given the risk of St Kilda Foreshore being home to the biggest urban stack in the country and the provision of incorrect information to Council and the panel from the outset, what checks and balances are in place to ensure that any future demand will be verifiable and transparent to the public? The second question, at 400, do we and the greater community really want to see St Kilda be the home of the biggest urban stack in the country?
Thank you, Mr Radley. A councillor may take up that question on your behalf. Mr Peter Matthews, please. Welcome. Please pop on the microphone. No, pop it on.
Oh,
that's
right,
it.
sorry. Probably turned it off. My name's Peter Matthews, reasonably recent resident in Marine Parade, but born in St Kilda, so I've sort of got a bit of a passion for this area. But my submission, well, words tonight, might sound like I'm anti-development and anti-business and maybe redeveloping the Marina, and that is not correct. It's just the fact that this is a 50-year potential, I think, 50-year lease coming up. It's been over 50 years so far, and not a great 50 years for the Marina. And so when you sign up leases for 50 years, you give a pretty serious right of operation and development for a long time, and very difficult to stop. Either stop what they may overdo or underdo. So that's what my passion is about. And I'll sort of read this. The Amendment C171 appears to be drafted to benefit developers far more than ratepayer owners, and I emphasise owners. Ratepayers are the owners of the community assets, and I think councillors often forget that. So we are passionate about it, and we hope they will be too. Most of the key recommendations of the extensive community consultation process were rated nice to have, in contrast to very flexible options for developers, unbelievably flexible. I wished I'd been able to get those sort of options when I was renting rather large factories in Port Melbourne. Couldn't get within Cooey. Most of the key recommendations of the extensive community... Oh, I've said that. Those that attended many long consultation sessions must feel jilted. It's, I reckon, pretty sad. I didn't attend those. I attended a number of open sessions, but not the main ones where all the people spent all day. These are rhetorical questions. Who initiated the Amendment 171, Port, with 40% increase in commercial space, creating excessive increases in built form and bulk, and thought it would benefit anyone other than a developer? Who thought increasing the height of the one-storey buildings fronting Marine Parade, adding 2 storeys, going up to 12 storeys, which one of the staff said 12 storeys is 12 metres is not 3 storeys. They're the only one in the world that would accept that. And the same size and height buildings covering loosely defined areas of the car park and trailer areas, very loosely defined. So we don't know what will happen. Who suggested increasing the height of the dry storage buildings, 1 more storey, up to 15 metres high, equivalent to 4 storeys, and increasing the footprint with loosely defined limiteds that, the developer can sort of, at their discretion, add more? Gosh, wow, what a lease this is. Who believes it is okay for there to be no planning controls, or in other words, the developer basically controls what food outlets front onto Marine Parade?
Please come to the end, Mr Matthews.
Yeah. Who allowed such a divisive C17 planning amendment to proceed to this point after extensive community consultation? not the community and not the ratepayer owners. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Matthews. Mr Trevor White, please.
Good evening, Trevor White, live in St Kilda. As predicted, we note that the C171 amendment paper prepared by the City of Port Phillip staff has not been amended, even though there are 131 submissions, analysed over 169 pages. We're also not sure why the City of Port Phillip engaged the community to ascertain their views if their views are ignored and make no difference to the City of Port Phillip staff paper. We also note that the City of Port Phillip staff support the removal of the third-party rights of appeal. We will vigorously oppose this provision like the community did in 2007-2008 campaign relating to the St Kilda Triangle, which was documented in the film called The Triangle Wars. We urge Council to take control of this process and not to support the removal of third-party property rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr White. Mr Peter Holland, please.
Peter Holland, Chaucer Street, St Kilda. Traditionally, Melbourne's turned its back on the Bay and the Yarra River. I've been active in a whole range of foreshore issues over the last 35 years, so I'm very glad that this is changing. And with the Marina, I think we've got a great opportunity to celebrate our bay. I think we've got a great opportunity for the boating community and also the general public, especially Port Phillip residents. I want to address just one issue, and that is the possibility of a bridge over the Marina mouth. A bridge is practicable. There's hundreds of examples of this in Europe and also in Australia. However, it undoubtedly would be expensive. We could have an iconic bridge over the Marina mouth, and that's something that would be even more expensive. There are two broad benefits from having a bridge over the Marina mouth. One is that it improves the Bay Trail, the coastal path for pedestrians and cyclists, and encourages safe pedestrian activity, safe walking and safe cycling. But secondly, the bridge over the Marina mouth would invite the public to come in to the Marina, including the harbour village with its restaurants, cafes, etc. We could have a very vibrant harbour village. We'd open up the back of the Marina. Would open up to the public the best views in Melbourne. Now, the site brief is disappointing. It says that the bridge is a nice to have, but not a have to have. Now, in my opinion, that's totally inadequate. And I'd like to perhaps address the two present and one not present Greens councillors on this issue, because the Greens are often accused of believing in the fairies at the bottom of the garden. Now, they clearly reject this and say that they believe in sustainable environment and a sustainable commercial environment. Now, there's an opportunity here to prove it. I'm confident that none of the three tenderers will include a bridge in their proposals. It's not commercially realistic under the current planning framework. So I'm asking the three Greens and the rest of the councillors to consider, to prove that they're commercially realistic and to provide a significant incentive for the tenderers to consider putting a bridge over the Marina mouth. Now, my suggestion is that Council's position to the independent panel should be that if a tenderer proposes to include a bridge, then they get a benefit, and the benefit that I would suggest is a 10% increase in the commercial lettable area, so an additional, 20% increase, an additional 1,000 square metres of rentable area. That would be within the proposed envelope, so I think that it's quite feasible. I acknowledge that possibly it's still going to be too expensive. It may not happen. But if we do provide a significant commercial incentive for tenderers to include a bridge, then at least we've given ourselves the best possible opportunity of getting the best possible marina at St Kilda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Holland. Roseanne Frederick. Welcome. Thank you. So, Roseanne Frederick from Thackeray Street in Elwood. I'd just like to say that I'm not against the refurb of the marina. However, I cannot agree with the Council on changing the amendment C171. Last year I moved from Port Melbourne to Thackeray Street, Elwood, just 150 metres from the proposed marina development. I chose this location because of the surrounding parklands, quiet streets and village atmosphere. Elwood is the land of the poets, a leafy, natural, slower paced, some say bohemian part of the city. I think the Council is to be congratulated for providing a healthy environment for the Elwood community and Melbourne to enjoy. The waterfront parklands, walking and bike paths, the foreshore gym and training areas and skate park, all of these embracing fitness and healthy use of the foreshore. The noise levels have been lowered by control of the existing venues' trading hours and stopping large lorries from using Beach Road, all positive things for the community. Can the Council please explain why, after providing this ideal family environment, they would now allow a developer to build high-rise buildings on the foreshore and allow fast food businesses and taverns to bring noise and parking problems to the area, and in turn this will the litter from these venues will be scattered across our foreshore and into the ocean. My objection is the height of the proposed development. Unlike anything else in Elwood neighbourhood and the type of businesses that will bring large lorries back to the beach road. The lack of transparency by the Council on what is planned for the site, the implications for parking, noise levels and the safety of our streets after dark concerns me greatly. It betrays the role Elwood has always played as this special part of Melbourne and the Bay. This isn't the transients in Kilda. This is Elwood, a community of people who care about their suburb, who gather to enjoy picnics in the parks. They use the parks and beaches as part of their healthy lifestyle. Elwood is about the ratepayer's lifestyle, having a safe area for our children and grandchildren to enjoy, not an area of large venues, busy traffic, all on our foreshore. So I request the Council to abandon Amendment C171 and restrict this precinct to maximum 2 stories that preserves the marina and the surrounding parkland and, most importantly, the Elwood vibe and the true character of the suburb. When Melbourne has such a special location so close to the city heart, there is no benefit to the residents, the taxpayers, for the Council to turn our foreshore into oversized buildings of concrete like a generic St Kilda or Port Melbourne. Thank you. Thank you, Ms Frederick. Anna Borthwick, please.
Hello, Anna Borthwick. I'm from Plan A Planning Consultants, and I'm representing the residents of 45 Marine Parade and other interested parties. We continue to act for these local residents and interested parties, and at this time we continue to oppose the development plan schedule and the amendment in its current form. While the parties do acknowledge the benefit of the master plan for the site and applaud the officers for their recommended changes to the development plan schedule as set out in the delegate report for tonight's meeting, specifically reducing the building height for building Evelyn 2 to 11 metres and nominating only temporary buildings that only temporary buildings at single storey can be granted a planning permit prior to the preparation of a development plan. The parties I represent, however, are still concerned with the following aspects of the proposed provisions. Removal of third-party rights. The provisions provide opportunities for new developments that are expansive in scale and size and do not reflect the existing character of the foreshore marina area. The provisions include ambiguous wording and statements creating uncertainty in their interpretation in the future. And importantly, we're concerned that there has been limited background environmental research and design studies undertaken in the preparation of the provisions. We feel that specifically this research would be utilised to inform the design and vision for the marina and the foreshore area. And as such, at this time, we recommend or submit that the amendment should be abandoned until appropriate and adequate background documentation has been prepared and can then appropriately inform the design of the provisions. And we believe that this will ensure that the outcome for the site, for a master plan for the site, will reflect and respond to the sensitive environment of the location. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms Borthwick. So we've got two more. Mr Peter Tanner, please.
Peter Tanner, St Kilda. I would like to raise two issues in relation to the content of the council response paper. The first issue is the boat shed capacity. On page 50, mention is made of extensive research on possible demand for dry boat storage, and the proposed increase to the size of the dry boat storage in DPO2 to accommodate a maximum of 400 boats reflects this. If a 400 boat shed were to be contemplated, this would mean that the St Kilda Marina would have the largest dry boat stack in Victoria. The difference in building size between 400 and 300 is 25%. The 300 boat shed would be 120 metres long, and the 400 boat shed would be 162 metres long. Any future research should include data on future less prominent sites, including off-site warehouse-style operations and how quickly boats can be transported from one site off-site to the marina. The St Kilda Marina Community Panel devoted a great deal of attention to this issue, with 82% agreeing with a staged approach to the dry storage was the way to go, with section 9.2 saying up to 300 boats allowable on stage 1. This decision was reached based on panel member follow-up and analysis of the facts and figures of the current boat shed numbers, waiting list numbers, and the number of boats standing without cover in the open air currently. It is noted that the recently opened 3-level Martha Cove dry boat stack facility has been completed with a staged development approach. The second issue I wanted to raise was the public boat launching and retrieval location. The possibility of moving the public boat launching area closer to the mouth of the marina for reasons that included traffic congestion and pedestrian safety is referred to on page 63. There's also mention that safety and functionality will be key considerations. I would suggest that a larger boat shed should not feature as a safety feature when considering the location of the boat shed public boat trailer launching site. I would note that other Port Phillip western-facing marinas such as Mordialloc, Frankston and Martha Cove do not have any large buildings on their foreshore. As a 13-year Victorian boat licence holder, and before that a New South Wales licence holder, and frequent user of the bay, I know that carefully checking weather conditions is a vital requirement that all boat users follow. If there's any suggestion of adverse weather, you never go out. Also, as a 29-year Marine Parade resident that has lived opposite the marina, I've never seen any white-capped waves within the marina site. It's very well protected. I note that the St Kilda Marina Environmental and Coastal Hazard Assessment Report notes on page 66 that inside the marina there is unlikely to be any significant wave action or sediment movement. The entrance The entrance faces northwest and is very limited wave fetch and is therefore not involved in any active coastal processes. Finally, I would like to note the St Kilda Harbour Marina, operated by the Royal Melbourne Yacht Squadron at the St Kilda Pier at Breakwater, also doesn't have any large buildings within the area of its foreshore. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Tanner. And our last speaker tonight, Mr Peter Meston-Watson, please. Welcome.
Good evening. My name's Peter Meston-Watson. I've been a resident of Marine Parade for the past 10 years. I live opposite the Marina precinct. I don't use the facilities at the Marina, and when the announcement came through, I decided to go through and have a look at it because I really haven't been into it. It just doesn't interest me. When I looked at it, I found it to be very tired, neglected in places, and I was certainly appalled by the amount of junk and rubbish that seems to collect in that area. Further, there are areas, particularly the area you've designated as Envelope 2, they seem to have developed in a very ad hoc fashion. So you've got an instance there of a trailer entrance that's been barricaded off, and there's a few other barriers and things that all just make it very difficult to walk around. In my opinion, the whole site requires a shot in the arm, and I'm commending the council for taking the initiative to propose a major redevelop of something which is an iconic facility for Melbourne. However, I just wish to reiterate a few points that I put through in an objection that I raised before last year. Firstly, the height, which has been covered quite extensively. I noticed there was a document sent out last week which was entitled Submissions to Amendment C171 Ports and Kilda Marina Frequently Asked Questions. So in that document it was gratifying to see that the buildings in Envelope 1, ostensibly along Marine Parade, have been reduced from a maximum height of 12 metres down to 11 metres, which I think is probably fairly appropriate. However, it does not seem to include Envelope 2, which presumably remains at 12 metres. As Envelope 2 also faces Marine Parade, the question I ask is, why is not a similar height reduction also appropriate for Envelope 2? Further, the car parking area which is proposed to be in Envelope 2, I don't believe has been adequately fleshed out, and as it stands currently, I can envisage a 12-metre multi-storey car park, and this has not been ruled out at this point. So the question again is, will any multi-storey car park be exempt from the 5,000 square metre area restriction that should be applied to the commercial buildings? My second point concerns the DPO, which nominates the preferred vehicle route for public boat ramp and trailer parking. Currently this is shown as off Marine Parade, directly opposite Thackeray Street. I'm having trouble understanding how such an entrance would possibly work, considering it's already been barricaded off in the past. The only way I can see it happening so that it can service northerly flowing traffic would be a controlled intersection. As we all know, Marine Parade carries large volumes of traffic that are a source of toxic air and noise pollution for the residents. Please come to the end. And I can testify to that because I get this green sooty stuff over every surface on my property. What Marine Parade does not need, I believe, is another set of traffic lights, because that will increase the degree of noise pollution and air pollution, which is always associated with vehicles stopping, starting and idling, and boy do they idle on that street. For health and practical reasons, I'm suggesting that the existing preferred car park entrance remain at Dickens Street. This is already a controlled intersection, so it services both north and south flowing traffic, and it's also wide enough to handle any trailer traffic travelling from the east.
Mr Meston Watson, please come to the end.
Okay. Last point is just public consultation. As far as I can see, there is no further consultation from the public available to us beyond this meeting today. So my question is, will the public be part of a consultation process after the commercial proposal has been submitted to the Council? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. That was the last of our speakers. Councillors, do you have any questions for the officers? Councillor Gross?
Mr Dewa. I've got three questions. The first is, can you talk to us about third-party rights and why officers would recommend as they have on this issue? Yeah, let's do one by one.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Through the planning scheme amendment process, the outcome will be a development plan overlay, which is an instrument which we've chosen, which we believe best enables us to have a master plan vision for the site in line with the site brief and the community engagement that we've done to date. It is true that an effect of a development plan, which is part of the development plan overlay process, is that planning permits must be obtained, but third-party notice and appeal rights are removed. What we have endeavoured to do through this process is front-load as much engagement as is possible, so that we can provide some certainty to council as landlord, to the community and to future tenderers about the bulk and scale of development on the site and what appropriate outcomes would likely to be. Probably to Mr Meston Watson's last point, as part of the approval of the development plan overlay, which is a process that follows the planning scheme amendment and is likely to be prepared by the preferred tenderer, Council has undertaken or has committed to undertaking further engagement with the community in it's non-statutory, but Council has agreed to do further consultation as part of that process.
Your next question?
Just to follow up that issue, third-party rights are a lightning rod issue in the City of Port Phillip. So, what would be the implication if would there be any bad implications or good implications if these third-party rights were reinstituted from a planning perspective?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we would have to go back and start a different process using a different planning mechanism, because the development plan overlay, which is the outcome of this particular process, doesn't have third-party notice and appeal rights as part of it.
So using this process, we cannot stick in third-party rights? Not into a development plan overlay. That's correct. Okay. Can I turn our attention to the urban stack? What are the current rules proposed in this planning scheme amendment about the number of boats and future boats? Yeah, push the microphone a bit.
Sorry, can't hear.
Yeah.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So the Following on from some of the comments that we've had from speakers this evening and through the site brief process, 300 with an addition up to 400 were the agreed numbers for the dry stack.
And how are those numbers fixed on?
Through you, Mayor. The numbers were developed as part of the development of the site brief, and there was a lot of research done at the time around what was happening elsewhere, what's currently on site, what might future demand be. And what we ended upon, which is reflected in the site brief, is that 300, we're fairly certain there's going to be demand for that, and that's why we've said, as of right, 300 automatically. What's uncertain is the full extent of demand, but what we've done is limited it to 400. So we've placed an upper limit, and we've said that the 400 needs to be proved to be needed before it is approved. And that way we've dealt with the uncertainty around what's actually required, but allowed enough flexibility for the market to prove what it needs, so that we're not unnecessarily limiting the ability of the site to meet future demand when we know that there are limited areas where this kind of development can work, which is a marina, and that's the primary purpose of this site.
So just to clarify then, that extra 100 would need to be the subject of a future application, or would it be part of this process?
Through you, Mayor, the requirement is that the 400 needs to be, the extra 100 needs to be proven. The timing around that being proven could happen any time. So there's no requirement for a staged approach. There's a preference expressed in the site brief, but basically all that's required is them to prove need. So that need might be proven up front, it might be proven in future years, but basically that's the core requirement.
Thanks very much. My final question, if that's okay, Madam Mayor, is about the bridge. What are the rules about the bridge?
Through you, Madam Mayor. The planning scheme amendment, which we are considering tonight, does allow for the provision of a bridge within the controls. We know from the development of the site brief with the community panel and from conversations with other members of the community and councillors that the bridge is considered to be a highly desirable thing, and this is reflected in the site brief.
Thank you. Councillor Brown, did you have one specifically about the... Okay, and then I'll go to Councillor Copsey. I know you had your hand up earlier.
Just following up on two of those questions. With the number of boats, what would happen if a tenderer decided there was only a market for 150 boats or something? Is there a lower limit that we require? Are we requiring 300, or are we? This is just following up on that question that was raised before.
Through you, Mayor, I would have to clarify and take that question on notice.
Just on the bridge, in a similar vein, the planning provision we're putting in place, proposing to put in place, the DPO, it doesn't provide any incentive for a bridge, and it doesn't provide any disincentive. It allows a bridge. I'm just going back to Mr. Holland's comment. Is there anything that we could be doing at this particular stage to be incentivising a bridge rather than permitting a bridge in this DPO process?
Through you, Mayor, Council has two roles in relation to the marina and in general, and many other roles, no doubt, but the two key roles are the planning function and also as landlord. So as landlord, Council has adopted a site brief that says what the outcomes for the site need to be, and that's based on a community process. The other part is the planning scheme and implementing the planning scheme, and that's what the amendment is about. Council, as landlord, is running a procurement process at the moment for a new lease, and that procurement process, as landlord, they will appoint with approval of state government a new tenant, and in that process, council is able to specify through its tender process what the requirements are, and then enter into a very specific lease. The planning scheme amendment is providing another mechanism that is separate, that operates in a different way to regulate what occurs on the site. They're two different processes, and council has more ability as landlord to specify what it wants on the site, and in that process, as landlord, has said that a bridge is highly desirable, but that it's uncertain whether or not it can be achieved, so it hasn't made it mandatory, and that's what's in the site brief. So the procurement process that is underway at the moment is about implementing that site brief as per approved in the procurement plan earlier or late last year.
Councillor Copsey.
Thank you. I just wanted to take up a couple of the questions that were raised by submitters. The first was regarding capacity and how demand and capacity and uptake of boat storage will be tracked and reported publicly, and whether we'll have a transparent mechanism. Do you have any details on that so far?
Through you, Mayor. So the question is relating to future monitoring of the site. So in any future agreement, there will be reporting and monitoring requirements to track and report on, as with other key leases, key elements of the site. So with the Palais Theatre, for instance, there's an annual report, and that includes the things that are of most interest to council and the things that they most cared about and wanted to make sure were in the lease, and that is the same opportunity here.
And through you, Madam Mayor, just to clarify that, as Ms McNeil has indicated, tonight we're considering the planning controls, and in regards to boat storage, the DPO specifies a maximum height for that area, envelope 3, of 15 metres, and a maximum building footprint. So it allows for the flexibility through the planning controls, but doesn't specify the actual size of the actual development, which will be ascertained through the procurement process. So this is just to enable the next process to occur and the flexibility of the size.
Do you have a further question, Councillor Copsey?
Yes, the second one I picked up that I don't think has been covered yet was regarding the reduction in height that's been recommended by officers tonight in response to community feedback in relation to envelope 1, and why that applies to envelope 1 and not other locations where there might be built form on the site.
Through you, Madam Mayor. After considering the submissions, officers felt that it was appropriate to consider lowering the height for that building envelope 1 from 12 metres to 11. The intent of the original height was to allow commercial development with commercial floor-to-ceiling heights, which are generally much greater than residential ones, and it was always a view that development along Marine Parade would be within that 2-storey plus roof and plant type configuration. However, we can appreciate that members of the community were concerned that that might allow for 3-storey development on that side of the street, which wasn't really the intent. The buildings opposite building envelope 1 all have an 11-metre height limit on them, and we felt that was appropriate to match that.
Thank you, Mr Dewar. I've got a question as well. I think it's to you, Mr Dewar. This is quite a convoluted process that we're going through, in particular for the community that's perhaps going through it for the first time. Can you actually outline, if this recommendation was to be supported by councillors tonight, what are the next steps and opportunities for the community in prosecuting their issues and getting some of the things that they might want. Can you outline that, please?
Through you, Madam Mayor, if councillors support the referral of the amendment this evening to an independent planning panel, that is the next opportunity that members of the community have to speak to their submissions. The directions hearing for that panel is the 24th of February, with the panel hearing likely to be toward the end of March.
So, Mr Dewar, what happens in that panel hearing? So people go and make their case, and then what happens?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's an independent planning panel that will consider both the submissions of the members of the community and others, as well as council's responses to those submissions, and it will make a ruling based on its expert evidence, which, following that comes back to council for consideration.
And when it comes back to council, whatever council's decision is final. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Mayor, to the extent that, yes, following that then goes to the Minister for signing, Minister for Planning for signing.
Thank you. So just to be clear, there's still more opportunities for the community to...
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Copsey, you wanted to send...
No, that was the question I was going to ask.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Beat you to it. Councillor Crawford.
I've got a couple, if I may. So just back to the section 1, which is on the Marine Parade side of the Marina, given that it has, the recommendation is to go to 11 metres height, it is very narrow though, isn't it? So in terms of the build that could be there, it's very unlikely to be a huge thing because it's quite a narrow space that they would be building in. So it's not only the height, it's actually the parameters is also how narrow it is. Is that correct? Am I reading that correctly?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is correct. It's envisaged that buildings and footprints along Marine Parade will be for narrower buildings that need to be double-fronted, so that they need to be facing both the Marina and Marine Parade. And that was another consideration in thinking about reducing the height, that we didn't need overly tall, skinny buildings in that location.
But currently there is no limit on the height there under as the Marina stands at the moment. Is there?
Yes, technically that's correct.
Can I just ask a question about the possibility of a multi-level car park? So is that's a separate space would be to the square meterage allowed for retail and commercial practices? But can I clarify, I thought there was maybe a thinking that if it was to be multi-storey, it could be surrounded by, I don't know, shops or shielded in a way that it's less of an eyesore. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it was envisaged that any multi-deck car park would be in addition to the 5,000 square metres of commercial development. One of the intents, or one of some of the thinking through the development of the site brief and then the controls was the desire to see some consolidation of car parking across the site to open up more public open space across the site for people to be able to enjoy. It was also the intention, if there was any multi-deck car park, so multi-deck was 2 stories, maybe 3 depending on the floor to ceiling height, that they would be sleeved in the commercial retail offer that was part of the site's commercial area.
And may I ask one more question? I was wondering, in regards to the recommendation to allow a 50 square metre cafe or whatever out near the beacon, if the planning, this amendment, if it was to go through, does it preclude any pop-up ventures? So if we were to not allow that 50 metre under this planning scheme, could there still be like a pop-up over summer, some kind of small facility or storage or pop-up facility, or not?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, pop-up non-permanent structures are allowed.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions as well. Mr. Peter Holland said, could there be, in order to get a bridge, could there be, as compensation, a 20% increase in rentable area allowed as one of the offsets? I just want you to please address that question, please.
Thank you, Mayor. the procurement process is underway and it reflects the site brief and what was approved in the site brief. And so there's, that process is, given that it's underway, whatever was approved for that to be released or what was included in that when it was approved and went out, now is in train. And so now there's limited ability to change that process, given that that process is now underway.
Okay, thank you. So no flexibility there. Mr. Peter Meston-Watson talked about an additional set of traffic lights. Has there been any consideration around how that's going to play out with two sets of traffic lights there?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it wasn't necessarily... So through the site brief, whether those traffic lights could be relocated further south, so to the south of the current service station, to improve traffic circulation and reduce some of the pedestrian and other conflicts that currently exist at the Dickens Street intersection, is something that can be investigated or considered, or it's supposed to be considered or investigated as part of any submission through the tender process, and that obviously sits outside of the site boundary, so as such doesn't form part of the planning scheme amendment.
And we also had the comment around high-rise buildings and fast food outlets being on the site. Are you able to potentially comment on the fast food businesses, whether that's something that will be allowed?
Through you, Madam Mayor, fast food, standard fast food, isn't allowed through the planning scheme amendment. That doesn't include sort of stand-up takeaway fish and chips, for example, which would be an appropriate type of use at a marina. And high-rise buildings, the limit on development other than for the dry stack is 12 metres, which means that no building can be greater than 3 storeys on the site.
Councillors, any further questions? Okay, then we have an officer's recommendation, and I'd like to consider that in parts tonight. So we have 4 parts to that recommendation. So first of all, I'd like to call on a mover for 3.1. Councillor Brand to move. Councillor Brand has moved. It does. Okay, sorry, we're just got some amendments here, so trying to work out. Councillor Gross is going to move the amendment, officer's recommendation of 3.1. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Baxter? As it stands. We have a mover and a seconder. Thank you. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to the motion?
Okay. This is a landmark moment for people in Elwood and the southern part of St Kilda, and also for users of this marina. Let me say a few things first. It's a bit complicated because there are 2 processes. There's the procurement of the actual building of the marina and design thereof, and there are these planning rules. These planning rules that we're discussing tonight are not decided and not set in concrete. They go from here to an expert panel, and you are entitled to go to the expert panel and say that council and its officers got it wrong. It then comes back from the expert panel, and we're sort of like a post box, and we send it off to the minister. and you can lobby the minister. This is the first of a back and forward process between here and the city where lots of people will look at it. So please don't think that this is the end of the conversation. It's really just the beginning. So that's important to understand, that we're involved in this complicated labyrinthine process of lots of people having a look at it. The second thing is, I want to go to was it Peter, the last speaker, who said the place is a mess. He's a local, he never goes there, the place is a mess. And that's the situation. After 50 years, it's tired, it doesn't meet the needs of the community. To my way of thinking, it looks ugly. It doesn't have the sort of entertainment that would take me there. It's just not serving the community's uses, and we need to do something about it. And anyway, the lease is coming to an end. So leaving it as a messy, underutilised, ugly place is really not an option. And and we have to do something. And all change is scary, and I get that. I want to just talk about 3 issues of substance. First of all, the height of the buildings. Now, one thing that was quite sort of confusing and misleading, actually misleading for people, was in the design buildings, we had these square blocks around the site. And these square blocks don't indicate what the building should look like and don't indicate how big they are. They're quite misleading, but they were quite necessary. The site will not be filled with tall buildings. It will preserve its open character. The buildings will mostly be 1 and 2 stories with hopefully expressive roofs and nice roof terraces and perhaps some taller feature elements. This is hopefully a way of improving what's a pretty mediocre place at the moment and doesn't attract the community, and when the community go there, all they see is lots of ugly fencing stopping them from going to places that are interesting. Can I just talk about the Marine Parade frontage? Really important that we maximise the views through there. There's a requirement, there in the plan there's this big 12 metre block. But there's also a requirement in the fine print for no more than 50% of the Marine Parade frontage to have buildings on it. So immediately you take that big block, cut it in half, and that's the maximum that it can have. So it looks terrible at the moment, but when you look at this terrible picture and look at the fine print, it's much, much less intrusive and should increase the views to the marina from Marine Parade. That's what the rules will require. So please don't think that those square blocks are what's going to be built. It's going to be well designed, much smaller in terms of coverage. And indeed, you know, about 11% of the site will be allocated to buildings, so that 89% will not have a building on it. 89% will not have a building if you have a mix of 1 and 2 story buildings. So, you know, you can laugh, but that is the arithmetic. So please don't walk out of this room thinking that it's going to be chock-a-block full of big buildings. That's not going to be the case. And it's difficult to read these plans and rules, but really, I don't know. You're a planner. I don't know why you're acting in this way. It's with this, but you know, really, the whole aim of this is to increase the amenity, to make it more attractive, and not be scary. Secondly, we come to the bridge. I and several other councillors are desperate to have the bridge. Desperate. The bridge would bring in walking and bike traffic in through the site from the north and could be fantastic. So I think that we really hear what Peter said. We can't adopt his way of attracting the bridge, but we are, a lot of the councillors, not all I assume, but many of the councillors are desperate to have the bridge, which would be fantastic if we could get it up, because people would be walking all through the site, and it's a vast site. People who've been on that site will know it's very big. Finally, I come to third-party rights. I'm really disappointed that the current planning mechanism that has been chosen doesn't allow third-party rights, because I personally have been burned on this issue in previous debates, and I sort of regret that, but there's not much we can do, because the state government has a series of planning tools which don't allow third-party rights, which means that you can then go and take it to VCAT. So yeah, look, I absolutely hear what you're saying. Can I say that third-party rights are a burning issue in this community? But having said that, one of the main proponents of third-party rights had the opportunity to insert them into a proposal on Amendment C113 and didn't take that opportunity. So this is a complicated issue, and some of those people who talked about third-party rights, their council representatives refused to insert them in a former important planning scheme amendment. So I hope you will see this in the future as a huge improvement, with heaps of open space, with lots of increase in views, and views at the moment are virtually non-existent because they've been blocked out by buildings put higgledy-piggledy across a poorly planned site. I hope in the future you will come to appreciate that it's going to be a massive improvement. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Councillor Gross. Councillor Baxter? Councillor Brand, would you like to make an amendment?
I'd like to make an amendment to the motion as it stands.
Would you like to read that amendment?
It would add really I prefer just to delete it from the main text, but I can't see where the main text is, so I'll put this in here. 3.1.1, building height DPO, DPO2, that's a good point, Andrew. Retain the maximum allowable building height in DPO2 for built form in envelope 1 as 12 metres.
With the addition of, with the following change in red as well, which is very
right,
minor.
yes.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bond? Councillor Brown, would you like to speak to
I'd
the
like to
motion?
explain why, and it comes down to the way that the building envelopes work and that the DPO works, because I want to assure you that I'm not proposing more development on this site. It's the way the development is arranged. And at the moment, along Marine Parade, we have a large building envelope, which, as Councillor Gross says, if you picture the building as the shape and size of the building envelope, it would be an horrendous, terrible imposition on everybody. That envelope is like a cage within which building can be built, and only a very small proportion of that building envelope is allowed to be filled. There is a limited amount of development that is allowed on that site, and there are all sorts of provisions which make sure that that it's only at least 50% permeable in terms of looking through it and what have you. But it's a question of, if you have a building that you want to put on that site, the envelope at 12 metres will allow you to do a building which is 12 metres high, but it would, in a sense, arithmetically has to, be a smaller footprint building. It's like you could have a building which is either a long and low form like that on a sheet of paper in landscape, or you can have the same building which would be a narrower and taller building, the same volume of building this way or that way. There are arguments for both. If it's a long, low building, you get maybe more sky, but you get more of the horizon blotted out because it's a wide building, and more view into the marina blotted out because it's a wide building. If it's taller, it might intrude into the sky a bit more, but you get to see around the sides and you get wider gaps between the other buildings, so you get more views into the marina, more views of the horizon. It's a simple...
Excuse me, can the public please be quiet during this time?
It's a simple geometrical proposition which I don't think it's hard to understand. That is all I'm saying, that the envelope allows both of those. If we cut it down from 12 metres to 11 metres, it probably means that it is saying, say for this example, that it has to be landscape size, it has to be a low and wide building, which I don't think is necessarily the ideal solution to absolutely optimise what we want out of the site. It'll block views into the marina and it'll block views of the horizon. It might be better that way. Who knows? We're not dictating that. We're leaving it open for designers to come in and say, after studying the whole thing and really working it through, this is what it might be. It might be on the top of a building, on top of a small building there might be like a lookout tower, or some sort of picturesque lookout tower that people can go up and watch the skydivers land or something or other. I don't know. It's not, I think that we should be allowing the opportunity for small elements in the landscape like that, which have a sort of a romantic or a picturesque possibility to be built. And if they build up there, they are taking volume away from somewhere else. When the developers when the tenderers sort out their plans and we get to see them, we'll be able to choose which is the best response. But the envelopes that we're looking at now is allowing the scope for the best responses to come in. So I'm just moving this because, just on principle, I don't think changing the envelopes is actually going to improve the design outcome. And it is certainly, the more flexibility there is in how to design this thing, the more likely you are to come up with the optimal result. And I promise you, this is not a vote for more development volume on this site. It is exactly the same amount of volume, just differently arranged and perhaps better arranged.
Councillor Bond, would you like to speak?
Not too much more to add, other than I agree with Councillor Brand's assessment of the need to keep this at 12 metres. If the less height we allow in these building envelopes, and most people associate height with building size, the less height we allow in these building envelopes that are proposed on the site, the greater the mass at ground level that these buildings must consume in order to meet the whatever square meterage that they're constrained to. So what this is about is allowing flexibility within the site for the designer, and it's not us that are designing the buildings, it's the developers, the people that are coming back to us with the proposal so that they can build their 5,000 square metres, which is the cap on the entire site, in whatever way they think best responds and provides the best outcome on the site, with a number of requirements we have in there, such as Councillor Gross mentioned, you can't cover more than 50% of that marine parade site. There's view lines that need to be preserved. There's permeability of the site that needs to be achieved. So all these envelopes are not the size of what will be built on the site. They are the limits of what will be on the site. And within those limits, there are numerous other measures that will ensure it is a quite tight, constrained building that is eventually built there, whatever the developers choose to propose to us in a couple of months' time when we see those proposals. So I support this in allowing the retention of flexibility for the people that are designing what will eventually go on that marina site for us.
Would anyone else like to speak for or against the amendment? No, so I'll put that to a vote, unless Councillor Brand, you wanted to have a response, but I don't think... All right, we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? That is tied. So then I get a casting vote. Okay. Oh. Divisions are...
She voted the first time. I think you're causing a division.
That's a good way forward. So Councillor Bond has requested a division, so I'll ask you all to vote again. All those for the amendment, Councillor Brand, Councillor Bond, Councillor Pearl, and Councillor Gross, half-hearted there. All those against, Councillor Copsey, Councillor Voss, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Baxter. That is tied. And still leaves me in the same position. So I'm going to stick with my vote of voting against, so that motion is lost, which is the officer's recommendation. So that amendment is lost, and so we're right back with the substantive motion, so all of that red is gone. Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak?
To propose an amendment, is that what we're moving on to the next section?
Would you like to read out what the amendment is?
Well, actually, I would like to remove 3.1.2 and completely not allow the 50 square metres. Certainly the beacon, given that a pop-up is still allowable under this planning amendment.
So there is no 3.1.2?
Isn't there in the original motion, recommendation?
No.
Has that been removed?
No, you just stick. That's the mistake.
Sorry?
So I think that if you wanted to add that in, you would pass that as a motion.
So it's not in the original? No. Sorry, I was confused. I thought it was in the original recommendation, so maybe I don't need to move an amendment. Can we just check that? Because maybe I'm reading my old papers.
So point of clarification, is the...
We didn't end up with this one.
Okay, so I do need to delete the activation of the end of the Peninsula Promenade adjacent to the beacon. Delete that recommendation.
So are you putting in the words delete?
That's what they were going to.
I think Kylie's
Wordsmithing it.
Yes. So can I clarify with you, Councillor Crawford, that you want all of that in there, including the bridge?
The bridge wasn't part of the original recommendation, so that's not needed.
So would you please read the words that you want in there?
So I'm happy with delete the following: activation of the end of the Peninsula Promenade adjacent to the beacon via a kiosk stand-up paddleboard facility, DPO2. Allow the provision of a single-storey kiosk of a maximum 50 square metres plus storage for stand-up paddleboards, canoes at the end of Peninsula Promenade adjacent to the beacon. A beacon and views to the beacon are protected. So that captures what I'm suggesting for the amendment.
Okay. Do we have a seconder? Oh. Okay, Councillor Bond is the seconder. Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak to your amendment?
Yes, I would. I think a key message that we've heard tonight and all the way through from our community is open it up. It's about getting closer to nature and beautiful views. And I think it's very unnecessary to pop a cafe close to the beacon, given there will be cafes and activation literally metres that other businesses will be trying to survive. In the middle of winter, there will not be the foot traffic to maintain any cafe, and it will just be an empty box out near the beacon. And given that you can do pop-up cafes or stand-up paddling boards or whatever it may be during summer months when there are people who will be there and it will be able to be maintained as a business, I just think it's unnecessary. It adds an ugly when we're trying to open out the natural part of the facility. And I also am not even sure that stand-up paddle boards when it's an operating marina is actually a safe idea. So I just think there are still options in a pop-up sense, and why would we want to put a business that will struggle in the middle of winter out there in a permanent building?
Councillor Bond, would anyone else like to speak to this? Yes, Councillor Bond seconded. Would anyone else like to speak for or against this amendment? Councillor Brand?
Yes, I'm speaking against it on the same similar grounds as before. I think the amendment may be well intended, but it is based on a misunderstanding of what we're actually doing here. At the moment, we have a provision proposed that a small cafe plus a store for paddleboards and kayaks and things might be placed closer to the end of the peninsula, where a bridge may or may not arrive, and it allows for that possibility. It's in the same place as the Coast Guard, in that same area where the Coast Guard sort of building is. Not a beautiful building, I agree with that one. But what the DPO allow is, and the building envelopes that we're proposing to put into it, is allowing the possibility for things to happen and good things to happen. If it's decided that, if one of the tenderers decides that it'd be just absolutely fantastic to do a cafe out there in association with the bridge coming across and a little place where people could sit and watch the bridge opening and closing and people running across it and out by the beacon, it's a really, really picturesque site. I don't see that we sitting in this room here, without the imagination to actually know what could happen and what couldn't, nor the business acumen to know what would work there or not, should be saying, oh, we better not have one of those. It's just not the right place to be doing it. If the only proposals come in with a cafe out there and a small craft store, bog ugly, intrusive things that block out the view for everybody else and what have you, it's not going to be chosen. If somebody comes in with something fantastic, it might be chosen. The developers and the tenderers for this, if it's not economically viable to put it out there, they are the last people to put it out there. So, the arguments about whether it's probably not economically viable, that is absolutely micromanaging the design of this thing when we're not meant to be micromanaging. We are meant to be macro-managing what you can't do. And it's just ridiculous to prevent this possibility from being activated. It won't be put there if it's not economically viable, and it won't be put there if they want to win the tender, which has major criterion of public openness, beauty, utility, economic viability, as all of the criteria. If it's not going to work, it's not going to work. It's not for us to decide. We should just be allowing the best, we should be open to really beautiful and useful possibilities. And that's what I think we're trying to work out, what we're voting on here, and not what the eventual outcome might look like or not, or how it might fail. So I think it's not in the spirit of what we're meant to be doing here tonight to be proposing this.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll speak in favour of this amendment. I do get where Councillor Brand is coming from, but I probably have less faith in developers in always getting it right. I think we've had plenty of experience in that respect. No, I'm not saying that's what Councillor Brand said, because it's not quite. But I certainly, yeah. So I have less faith in that respect. So I'm a bit more happy to sort of micromanage, as Councillor Brand might call it. I do think that there is a tendency for an assumption that activation will always mean a cafe or a kiosk or something like that. I do think that this amendment doesn't remove all abilities for activation up in that area. They just don't have to necessarily be a built form method of achieving that activation. So I think that this is reasonably sensible. It wasn't in there before. It's being considered based on a proposal from a proponent, and I think that we might just stick to our guns on this one.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Anybody else want to speak for or against the amendment? Councillor Crawford, would you like to close? No, then I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? That amendment is lost, and we are back to the substantive motion of 3.1. Councillor Brand has called a division, so I'll ask you to vote again. All those for the amendment? Councillor Baxter, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Bond. All those against? Councillor Gross, Councillor Pearl, Councillor Voss, Councillor Brand and Councillor Copsey. That motion has been lost. So we're back to the substantive motion of just 3.1. And we have Councillor Brand and Councillor Bond have spoken to this motion. Does anybody else want to speak to the substantive? I'm sorry, Councillor Gross and Councillor Baxter. Apologies, you're right. Okay. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Brand, would you like to speak to the substantive motion?
Yes, just a little bit more. I support this DPO and this proposal. There's so many topics to cover. Councillor Gross has covered quite a few of them already quite well. I just want to re-emphasise, maybe just look at a little bit of perspective. The size of this new development, which it is allowing and enabling. We've got a new development proposal the DPO is proposing to sort of, I suppose, allow the scope for, which involves increasing the number of boats stored in the marina, maybe by a third or something, increasing the size of the physical built form development by maybe about a third or 40%, something like that, which, when you consider over a period of 50 years, is not a very substantial change in size. You know, it's well within a very, very slow natural growth of a building. It's not a radical change. It's quite modest. It's quite sparse. It'll be much better. It'll improve the public access to the land enormously. All that peninsula will be reopened, or most of the peninsula will be open from one end to the other. The fences that stop us getting into the place at all will be down. There's so many other reasons why it's going to be a far better facility, but the size of it is only, I don't know, it's maybe 30-something% greater than it was 50 years ago. So I just think this is quite a conservative, quite a modest, extremely thoroughly debated and consulted and planned proposal, which will allow, perhaps encourage, creative designs and proposals and operators and operations to happen there, which we have not seen yet. And at the moment, all we're trying to do is encourage the best, prevent the worst, and hope that that all of the best proposals that come in, out of all of those, there are some sensational ones, and that we will get something really good. I don't think we could ask for anything more than that ultimately.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Councillor Crawford?
I actually think we all want the same thing. A much more beautiful and better designed, a much more open marina, which has greater open space and greenery and access for the public, a safer bike connection, better environmental outcomes for our bay and just the area around it. I think we actually want the same thing. And we also need a marina that is commercially successful in order to pay for all of these better things. And that's actually what this planning amendment's about. It's about giving clear, like a framework, a certainty to the people that are going to tender for it, that this is where they can put things, so it's not a constant changing process for them. And, there's going to be better views, there's going to be much more access for the public out to the beacon or, through and see the marina at work. So we've just got to get the parameters right. So we're really restricting. It's not going to be high-rise, it's not going to be a hotel, it is going to have entertainment of some description, which it currently does. It will have facilities for cafes and all of the like, the things that we want it to be. And we want it to be more sustainable environmentally and commercially, and we also want it to be, as we said, our marina, so we can access it. But in order to do that, we need to give certainty and a certain time frame to the developers. Going back and forth, to VCAT would draw this out and we would not get the best outcomes. And I just want to say I understand change is hard and I understand that people are worried about what it's going to be, but they are really tight, like they're 2-storey maximum buildings that are going to be on there. We're asking for much more open space, all the things you want. No, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but we do know the framework in which it can be placed on the site. That's what this is about. We have done, one of the things I feel very assured about, everyone's talking about community consultation. We have done, and it's listed in the document, so much consultation since the very start of this process. Is it nearly 2 years ago? I can't even remember. We've been over and over this. And can I tell you that the community at every step has basically said the same thing. They want the open space. They want limit on heights. They want a better designed marina. They want more access for the public. They want better and safer bike paths. They want better ecological outcomes for the bay and for just the general environment. And guess what? This planning amendment is designed to deliver all that. We're consolidating buildings in order to give you more open space. We're consolidating things in a slightly different frame, and yes, it is change and it will be a little bit scary, but honestly, the same things everyone's talking about, and it's the same things everyone's talked about since the very beginning of the process. What we all want is the same thing. This is just the framework in order to deliver to certainty to a developer, to make it commercially viable, to deliver the things that we want. So I will be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Bond.
Councillor Gross alluded to a little bit earlier that council has 2 roles in this process. We have the role of the developer/landlord, in which we get to assess, in which we get to decide what goes on the site, and we've also got our other statutory role as the planning authority. And these 2 roles, when you come to projects like this, they come in conflict with each other. There's a lot of confusion here tonight about the 2 roles, and that demonstrates why a separation of these roles probably should be achieved or should be preferred. We saw the same conflict with the St Kilda Triangle, and unfortunately the problem with the St Kilda Triangle was that we could not, as a council many years ago, resolve the conflict between those 2 roles as the proposer of what is going to be built down there, and also the planning authority which got to sit and assess what was then built. So in effect we were assessing our own plans on the St Kilda Triangle. And I fear we're about to head down that path here again tonight with this particular proposal, whereby we're sitting here making changes and deciding where cafes go and, you know, where we would and wouldn't like a bridge. At the same time, in a couple of months' time, we're all going to have to sit down and effectively assess our own ideas. And I don't think that's a great position for us to be in as a council, in order to fairly and impartially assess whatever proposals are brought to us. But that's the situation we're in, so we have to manage that conflict internally as best we can. There's no doubt this is a tired site. It's largely fenced off and inaccessible at the moment, and it's certainly not permeable from a pedestrian or a cycling point of view. With regard to the procurement process, and that's not what we're here tonight to discuss, but I will touch on that briefly, I've got a lot of concerns about, you know, where we're at with that procurement process. Mr Holland alluded to the fact that we have no incentive in there whatsoever in order to attract a bridge. And in my opinion, that's a highly desirable feature which will change the permeability of the site. It will change the way people interact with the site and travel through the site. Unfortunately, without an incentive in there to attract that, and I think Mr Holland alluded to the fact that it's unlikely given the current financials on the site, or of the proposal, of the procurement process, that any of the 3 current developers are likely to propose a bridge, which will be a real shame for what we're trying.
Can you please speak to the motion?
I'm speaking to the motion.
Know what the procurement process is about. It's a very fine line.
No worries. I believe we've been too constrictive and prescriptive in our design of the site. I think more flexibility down there would certainly help us to achieve the best possible outcome. Once again, with Mr Holland's suggestion about the commercial space in return as an incentive for the bridge, I've fought that argument many times with my fellow councillors over the past 2 years and lost on every occasion. So there was an opportunity over the last 2 years to include an incentive, and for whatever reason they chose not to go down that path. With regard to the planning amendment, which was what we're here tonight, the heritage overlay on the site makes no sense to me. It's our intention to place a heritage overlay over the entire site and then grant permission to the developer to demolish every one of those buildings that we've just placed a heritage overlay on. I think that flies in the face of what most people's understanding of a heritage overlay, or the purpose of a heritage overlay, is to achieve. So I don't support the imposition of the heritage overlay. I don't support the relocation of the boat ramp. All it will do is achieve a requirement for greater roadways on the site, which will lessen the amount of usable space, public space and space for other activities to occur, if we've got to add a whole heap of more roadway right round the point to where potentially the new boat ramp could go. So I've got many concerns with what's down there. I think the flexibility we've given is not sufficient in my opinion. I don't think we've got enough commercialisation there. I don't think this planning amendment is right. It will help us achieve a good outcome, but it won't help us achieve a great outcome. And I'd like to see a great outcome on the site, not just a good outcome. So I won't be supporting this because I don't think it will help us achieve what it is we wish to achieve down there.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Copsey.
Thank you, Mayor. I won't be supporting 3.1 this evening. I have a lot of sympathy for many of the issues raised by submitters this evening. Previously, when we came to the point of developing the site brief for the Marina, I was regretful that I didn't think that some of the really key elements that I would like to see delivered for the community were included with enough force within the site brief. Some of those have been touched on tonight. Greater permeability around the site as well as along the front of it, I would have liked to see guaranteed. I would have liked to see guarantee for separated facilities for cyclists and pedestrians, particularly along the promenade. I'm concerned that if we don't see that, we'll have a repeat of the St Kilda foreshore, which currently is a shared space and it's a pretty conflict-ridden space for all users down there. And most importantly, I would have liked to see more emphasis on green open space, and am concerned about the overall development of the site, the massive development, and I don't agree with councillors who have said that we need more flexibility for the developers' interests as part of what's going forward. I think we owe it to our community to have a concrete vision for what we want to see on the site. And in saying all this, I really want to, though, acknowledge the hard work that officers have gone to, the amount of community consultation that's been undertaken so far, and the process that we are going through to make sure that we have a timely process that we're going through and that people's views are being heard, particularly the community panel. I believe was a really valuable way of gaining community insight around what we wanted to see on the site. I, like some people in the community, just feel we didn't quite get that balance right with the site brief. So consistent with that, I will be voting against 3.1 just on the grounds that I don't quite agree of where the officers have landed on their response to some of the issues raised by submissions. For me, another really fatal part in relation to my support for this proposal is the loss of third-party rights. I think that that's really disappointing, and it's not something that I could support. So I will be voting against 3.1. That said, I do want the process to continue. I want to thank everybody who's taken the time to engage with such depth with the issues, and it's nice to put faces to some of the names that have been coming through the inbox tonight. Thank you for coming and speaking. I think it's appropriate that the planning panel proceeds so that people's views and submissions can be aired there and considered by the experts. And I guess in summing up, my view coming to the Marina site has always been that this is a really iconic, once-in-a-generation opportunity. It is a significant piece of public land on the foreshore, which is an extremely sensitive location. It's one of a kind, and we've got one opportunity to get this right. So I take the view that this is a public space, first and foremost, that happens to house a marina, not a marina that then has to accommodate public use. I still remain very hopeful that we'll see coming through the procurement some bids that live up to the very high and rightfully held expectations of our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Would anyone else like to speak for or against this motion? Yep. Councillor Gross, would you like to close?
Okay, so this is a difficult and divisive issue. I beg you, councillors, don't kick this can down the road. It would be utter vandalism to do that. We have come up after many years, several years of consultation, of deep, thorough consultation with a proposal that can work. Now, we've had two councillors and we've had the same contradiction in the gallery. Some people want more development, some people want less. I myself believe at the end of this complicated, protracted process, believe it's impossible to make everyone happy. I can find things that get on my goat about this, but it would be utterly vandalistic to stop the process now. It would be the waste of 3 years of extensive and expensive consultation. It would mean that we would lose the expertise that's been invested in these councillors, and it would have to be flicked past to the next council with another short-term amendment of the lease. So there's another 3 or 6 year lease added on to the current leaseholder. I mean, it would be like a nightmare. And Councillor Copsey, I know you're upset about the mixing of bikes and peds. But, you know, let it go. It's such a small part of what's going to happen. And, you know, it's time that this council accepted that people will be unhappy. We won't get the perfection. And, like, I so really respect what Councillor Bond has been doing through this process. He's attended a lot. He's said things that I often agree with, and now he's in a situation, which I respect, where he can't vote for it. But I say to you, Councillor Bond, I get that your aspirations haven't been met. But it is true to say that many of the speakers have exactly opposite aspirations, and that's where we find ourselves with this. We've got the boaties, we've got the neighbours, we've got the users who are going to come along the foreshore, we've got potential entrepreneurs who are going to be in the commercial area. It's a nightmare trying to reconcile all these virtually irreconcilable views. So I say to everyone, please, don't send us back to the starting line. It would be utterly humiliating, expensive, destructive. We have to go to the next stage which is an incredibly well-considered planning operation, and we're in the middle of a procurement process. We can't rip it all up. We have to trudge step after painful step towards the end. And remember, there's going to be lots of protections for those people in terms of an expert panel and a minister who are going to be looking at this. We have to take the next step. This happens in this chamber all the time when we get stuff that's complicated, multidisciplinary. You know, there's about this planning scheme amendment has been informed by about 10 long, voluminous documents. A lot of the results I'm really disconcerted by, but overall it doesn't offend too many people too much. Please support this planning scheme amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Then I'll now put that motion. All those in favour of 3.1? All those against? That motion's carried. Councillor Bond has called a division, so I'll ask you to vote again. All those in favour of 3.1? Councillor Baxter, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Gross, Councillor Pearl, Councillor Voss, Councillor Brand. All those against? Councillor Bond and Councillor Copsey. That motion has been carried. Now we'll move to 3.2.
Can I propose, if we've moved that first section, that perhaps we move the three together, 3.2?
We can move those next three, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4 on block.
Together on block, if that is
any
permissible.
issues. Councillor Crawford to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross. Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak?
No, I think we've talked about the substantive. I am speaking, so yes, I am. I think that this is just procedural in what's the next stage of taking this to a panel. So I ask you to support it.
Anybody else?
I do want to say something. For the residents who are left, it's a leap year. On the 29th, I will be down at the...
Councillor Gross, please speak to them.
It's a procedural motion. I will be down there ready to talk to people on the Saturday the 29th.
Bring your pitchfork.
Thank you.
At 2 p.m.
Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Now we'll move on to item 4.1, which is the outcomes of the Audit and Risk Committee meeting of the 19th of November 2019. We have no members of the public that have requested to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? If not, do I have a mover to accept? Councillor Crawford to move that report be accepted. Councillor Copsey to second. Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak? Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak? I'll briefly speak to say this is pretty much business as usual. It does list all the things that we went through at that particular meeting. And I just wanted to note yet again that Mr Brian Dempson, who has been on the committee for quite some time, was unanimously nominated as the chair and replaced Helen Lanyon, who's been long-term and done an excellent job. So I commend the report to you. Would anyone else like to speak? She's still on the committee, yes, for another few months. I'll put that motion then. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Right, now we'll move into confidential. And so we've got one confidential item tonight, 5.1, Council's maintenance and cleaning contracts, a variation to the CEO delegation. I'd like to call on a councillor to move that the meeting be closed, Councillor Pearl to move and Councillor Gross to second. So the meeting will be closed in accordance with Section 89(2)D of the Local Government Act 1989 as the item relates to contractual matters. Or put